Zenfam. So, right now you're probably asking the same question a lot of other people out here are asking. What the hell is going on with this generation? Why is it so out of whack? Why does everything look like it's just not working properly? And consider we've all spent a bunch of money on this generation like we do every generation. What is wrong? That's simple, really. You see, the problem is that when this generation started, they said this generation would not be as long as the previous generation. That was something that was said. This generation will be shorter than the one that preceded it. And this was a direct reaction to PlayStation 3 generation, which was way longer than they expected it to be because we went through the bank crash, because the 1% got greedy. Doesn't that sound familiar? Anyway, so the global economic situation went down the gargala, and the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 lasted way longer than they were technically supposed to. But because of that, we got some brilliant games in that generation. We really did. And then the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One came out, and we got some brilliant games. And that generation started 2013? So that's 11 years ago that we started in the 8th generation. Think about that. That was a long time ago now that we technically ended. I mean, it was what? When PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series systems come out? That's what, almost 4 years ago now? I mean, we're staring down the barrel of a very possible PlayStation 5 Pro, which will be obviously more expensive than PlayStation 5. And PlayStation 5 is still expensive. It's not dropped in price. In fact, if anything, what was it, last year it went up in price because of production. And now you can't get the original PlayStation 5 model new. You have to settle for that new one, which has got like the two plates and the snap-on, snap-off. If you don't want it hard drive situation, which is kind of good and kind of not good. But it does make mine nice little collectible. Because mine's a launch model. And you just don't get those anymore. So maybe in the future there might be some kind of war for that. And maybe when PlayStation 5 Pro comes out, maybe I might get a little bit more in trade-in. Except I don't know if I could do a trade-in because games don't do trade-ins anymore, and that harms the second-hand game market and probably second-hand system market. Aye. But let's look at this. If PlayStation 5 is still expensive and PlayStation 5 Pro is going to be even more expensive, yet at the same time there doesn't really seem to be much in the way of new games and new IP for our current systems, the 9th generation. Because when we look at the 9th generation, a lot of the games that have come out in the last couple of years, figuratively, have also had 8th generation versions come out alongside them. So people on the last generation systems can play games that are technically for this generation. Do you see the problem that creates? People go, well, I don't need to buy the next system. I can stick where I am and play the new games. Now, this was essential because basically nobody had any money and the systems took longer to come out, especially in the case of PlayStation. Thanks to the big C, we had a whole slowdown in the production process. They weren't able to make the systems because they couldn't have the workers in the factories. And it wasn't just the PlayStation factory where they couldn't have the workers to make the systems, but the workers in the other factories that made the other parts that were shipped to Sony to make the PlayStation. So it was all over. It wasn't just a little bit here and a little bit there. It was the whole thing. That's what some future generations are going to have to learn about what we went through in the early part of the 2020s. Was the fact that the whole manufacturing base went, oh god. And this has had an impact on everything. That's one of the problems. Why we're having such a problem dealing with the shape of software development as it currently stands, because business never learns. It saw everybody buying games when we were all locked down because people were desperate for things to do, and people rediscovered their gaming. So gaming went brrrp, and software sales went brrrp, and hardware sales went brrrp, because people were buying stuff because they were bored out their minds. However, aside from people like you and me, gamers who actually love video games and have been here all the time and will never leave, a lot of the people that bought those systems during lockdown and bought those games during lockdown were, I wouldn't call them casual gamers, but they were gamers of circumstance. I mean, what was one of the big games during lockdown? That's right, being on a wee island with cartoon pals, socialising with other cartoon pals from other islands. I wonder why. So, Animal Crossing was massive, yes. And this had a knock-on, because there were so many games like that became popular because people needed to connect with people. And gaming is technically seen as a solitary activity. Yes, we have multiplayer games, but if you've noticed in the last couple of years, especially in this generation and leading up to it, how many people, when you go into an online lobby, do you hear with a mic? How much communication do you hear with squads? Next to nothing. Most of the mics that are out there are used by streamers. Yeah, and some YouTube commentators. But most of us wait till the game's been played and we use it as background like I do. So, the mics that are out there, they're some great mics, you know? Don't get me wrong about that. But they're not for the purpose that was intended. They were intended for in-game chat and communication and bringing people together. But I'll tell you something. When my son is playing with his pals, you know what they're mostly doing? He's got his phone at the side and he's got like Discord open, and he's chatting with his pals with lossless sound and lossless quality through Discord, even though he's got the PSN. And don't get me wrong, I mean the PSN's a cracking bit of voice software. It's good, solid communication software. Unfortunately, the PSN communication software hasn't changed since the PS3. It's literally still pretty much the same. It's barely evolved. It's gotten a couple of tweaks over the years, but it's still roughly the same set of code. And that's not good enough. If you want people to use your thing, it's got to sound good. It's got to perform good. And you can have all the nice mics you can on a really nice headset, but if you can't make that sound good to the person listening to it, and when you're in the video games, audio is important, then I'm sorry, it's just not going to turn out for you. And quite frankly, if you have one of these and you're talking into the mic like that, you have kind of going to be looking a bit weird, let's face it. And you can play this and the mic can pick you up, but it's never going to be as strong. So you end up, you know, having to use something like this. And admittedly, I'm probably making the sound go weird by having it this close to my face because I've got it set for further away. But yeah, that's not hugely practical. I mean, for me to record these videos and for it to be audio and stuff, that's got like a cable that goes into the PlayStation, and there's another cable that goes into the controller. And while this is going, I can't hear my PlayStation. So any sounds that it makes, like notifications or anything like that, or the playback on the video, I can't hear it. So that cuts out the audio. So then what you end up having to do is put on your headset. So then you've got a headset with a microphone, but you're bypassing the microphone for another microphone. It's a mess. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. So yeah, we've got games from this generation that have versions for last generation, and therefore people are going, well, why buy this generation's machine? That's a mess as well. So what are we going to do about this? Well, one, Sony, Microsoft, please cut off the 8th generation. It is more than time. Yes, you do have to have a period of time where both user bases can feel safe and secure, that they've not wasted the money and that they're still going to be able to be part of the game or conversation. But at some point, it has to move forward. There has to be a cutoff, and we've had these cutoffs in the past. Cutoffs. So, back in PS1, yeah, when we moved to PS2, although the PS2 was backwards compatible to PlayStation 1, there was still a good amount of PlayStation 1 games that came out for the first year or two of the PlayStation 2. Same with the PlayStation 3, till they took away the backwards compatibility. But yeah, when the PlayStation 3 came out, I remember there was a particular Need for Speed that I very much enjoyed, and I played both versions. And there was like a body shop where you could actually like live edit the parts on the cars, and it was available on both versions. But obviously the PS3 version was far smoother and had more capabilities, which was part of the leap forward. Is all like, look what more you could do with this particular given example, which was clever at the time. But now, PlayStation 4 games and PlayStation 5 games, aside from graphics, do pretty much the same thing, which is why I have advocated for the longest time that we need to move beyond graphics. We need to move beyond aesthetics. We need to start really focusing in on other things such as immersion, such as storytelling, and more lifelike experience. And I don't mean boring grind. I mean, when you look in a game's world, for it to react in a more believable manner, for animals and plants and weather to more closely simulate what you would expect from those things, even if they're on an alien environment. You could be on some planet far in the future, far across the galaxy, but there'd be a believability to like that purple 140-foot tree is reacting in a manner that it would be consistent with your expectations of a purple 140-foot tree on an alien world a couple of thousand light years away. You get what I'm saying? We need to have control systems that are more intuitive, and dialogue options that just sort of aren't dorky. Because some of them can be, and let's face it, we've all played those dorky options. And if we're going to have games where we have choice, the choices actually be meaningful. Because how many times have you played choice-driven games where you either go down the evil path or you go down the good path? It's never a mix. And no matter what happens, whether you play the evil path or you play the good path, or you try to play the mixed path, the ending's always the same. The only thing that changes is the power/his abilities that you get along the way. If you go like down the evil path, you get powers and upgrades that work for that particular character arc of evil. Go down good, same story. Which is one of the reasons why they do that, because they want you to play the game twice, so that the game lasts longer and looks good to shareholders and yada yada yada. But if a game came out where you were like completely free to choose your powers and choose your path and act more like a person, yes, that would be thematically more interesting and closer to human existence and therefore more believable, even though fantastical, which is a delicate balance to strike. But would it be as profitable? I would argue that eventually yes, because it would get more sales. And more sales, let's face it, that's the core of it, sales. Because companies make games for money. So it used to be back in the day it was done for art, but now it is very much all about the spondules. It's about the cash, it's about the readies, it's about the bread. And it has to be, because these companies have employees. Employees need to pay their bills. And some of these employees will also go out and buy video games. So, the only answer right now that I can think of is that, one, we need to cut off the 8th generation pronto. Secondly, the 9th generation needs a time extension. It needs to be shown to the consumer that it is actually going to be economically viable to buy a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X at this point, let alone a Pro model. Because what's the point in buying a 500 quid system when in 2 years, possibly 3, that's it, it's over. A couple of years of support, 5 years? People are not going to wear that, especially not in this economic climate. People are going to go, I'll just wait for PlayStation 6 then. And maybe there'll be a PlayStation 6. Sony has pretty much said there will be. But will there be a PlayStation 6 worth it when Xbox might not even release another system? Because Big Phil has gone, we might not do another system. They're looking to more probably become service only. They'll just publish games, maybe make games, but mostly just be a publisher. And if they're just going to be a publisher, then that means they basically turn into a bigger, fancier, better funded Sega. And if it's just Sega, but in new clothes, then all you're going to have to be in any kind of competition with PlayStation is Nintendo. And Nintendo don't give a toss about industry norms. They just do their own thing. I mean, they've always technically for the last 2-3 systems been half a generation behind. And then they go, I mean, they release at a completely different schedule, their games are of a completely different bent, their studios have very different ethoses. There's very few titles that appear on Xbox, PlayStation and Nintendo at the same time. And the Nintendo audience mostly skews towards different demographics. I mean, there are far more, I use the term sparingly, adult gamers on Nintendo platforms. Yes, they exist. mostly because Nintendo systems are also expensive, and gamers are skewing older and older all the time. We're still getting new blood in, but crucially, as much as we're getting the new blood in, people like me are still here, and people older than me are still here, still playing video games. And how do you have an industry that caters for kids like 7 and 8 years old playing video games in a Nintendo system, and dudes like me pushing 50 and beyond who want to play serious, narrative, heavily structured, beautiful games, even though they may have disturbing environments, be graphically beautiful. All of that has to be possible, and all of that has to work. That's a big ask. And then you've got companies shooting themselves in the foot by producing live service games in an already saturated market. Then you've got also companies bringing out games that are like microtransactioned to hell and back, even though the vast populace has gone, we don't want that. We really, really don't want that. I mean, how often have you said to your friends or read online of people going, I remember when games used to just come out and they used to just work. You buy the game, put it in the machine, and you played the game, and there was no day one update, there was no season pass, there was no DLC, it was just the game. And as much as I would like to see those days return, they are not coming back, ladies and gentlemen. It's that simple. For the fact of the matter is, games are so big and so complex now, with so many moving parts, that if a game was to try and come out feature complete, that game would at least be 2 to 3 years delayed from its inception point of when you were supposed to get it. If the game was scheduled for 2027, because if you wanted to release the game without bugs and have it without a day one patch and doesn't need to be updated and is fully in line with the concerns of the modern consumer at the point it comes out, which is almost impossible, then you're looking at having a game that be at least another 2 to 3 years delayed. So that game would come out in like 2030. And we already wait a long period of time for our games. But then, also as consumers, we go like, this game came out and it was a buggy mess, it came out too fast. But then the same consumers over here are going like, get that game out, I need that game, I'm finished these games, I want new game. Meanwhile, developers are stuck in there and go, make the game, 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 release the game. Oh god, they finished that, get out of this, get out of the pack, get out of the pack, get out of the pack. Oh god, they've got through the pack, quick! It's like, so between these 3 different states, there's just no room. Everything is squeezed, everything is just squished down into this tight little ball of stress. Which is why we've ended up with games that feel like jobs. Games are supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be our release from the hellscape out there. And yet, we spend our time trying to earn money to buy these games to momentarily free us. And yet, we have to end up spending more and more money, which means we have to earn more money, or we have to save more money to buy these games. And then some of these games come out, and the idea that a game's worth is determined by the game's length means we end up with these 300, 400, 1,000 hour games that take forever to complete and mostly don't get completed. There's so many people out there that buy video games, play the video games, and never see the end of them. there just needs to be a balance reached, and there is no balance. We have reached a point where video game people are out there buying video games that they'll never see the end of, and then they feel unfulfilled because they don't know how the story ended, because they haven't the time, they haven't the emotional bandwidth left to get to the end of the game. And yet, we are asked for more and more money, and we're asked to believe in systems that can do more and more, but don't do more and more because they're held back by the previous generation. It's kind of depressing. It needs to change. But the second you change it, you watch, there'll be another half dozen videos doing the exact opposite, going like, why are you taking away my 8th generation capacity? I want to play that new Horizon game. Let's call it Horizon Aloy Goes to Space, because that's where it's probably going next. So Horizon Aloy Goes to Space. I can't play that on my PlayStation 4. What a chip. I mean, what do you do in that situation? So I can understand why the games companies are afraid to actually cut off the 8th generation. But it just needs to happen. Because we can't keep putting out games that are for the last generation on this generation when the hardware is capable of so much more. But obviously, I would love your thoughts, so typey down below, let Envelope know. And if you made it to the end of this video, put storylines in the comments. Somewhere in your comment, hide it, so other people can't come along and type storyline and look like they made it to the end. No. Make it part of your message, but put the word storylines with an S, so I know you made it this far. Okay guys, hashtag support Scottish YouTubers, and of course, as always, they bother.